We now come to the Great British Energy Bill, programme number 2 motion, to be moved formally.
Beg to move.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Great British Energy Bill, consideration of Lord's amendments.
Now,
I must draw the House's attention to the fact that financial privilege is engaged by Lord's Amendments 2 and 11. If either of Lord's Amendments 2 or 11 is agreed to, I will cause the customary entry waiving Commons financial privilege to be entered in the journal. We will begin with Lord's Amendment 1, which we will consider together with the other Lord's Amendments as on the selection paper. I call the Minister to move the motion to agree with Lord's Amendment 1.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I am pleased that the Great British Energy Bill has returned to this House, and I'd like to thank all members of both Houses for their scrutiny of this important legislation. And can I in particular extend my thanks to the Minister for Energy Security and Net Zero, Lord Hunt of Kings Heath, for his invaluable support and collaborative approach in guiding the bill through the other place. 12 amendments were made there that I will seek to address today. Before I turn to them, I do want to remind the House that this government was elected on a manifesto commitment to set up Great British Energy, and that is exactly what this bill does. Since the bill was last in this House, we've appointed 5 start-up non-executive directors and announced Dan McGrail as the interim CEO based in Aberdeen, so that Great British Energy can quickly get the expertise needed to help the company develop. I was delighted to convene the first meeting of Great British Energy's Board of Directors last week in Aberdeen. We are determined to get Great British Energy delivering for the British people as soon as possible. It has already made some incredibly exciting announcements on initial projects, including a partnership with the Crown Estate, and most recently announcements on solar for schools and hospitals across England, with funding also to Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. We look forward to GBE making further investment decisions on projects this year, driving forward on our clean power mission and creating thousands of jobs right across the country in the process. Turning, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the specific amendments, Lord's Amendment 2 would prevent the Secretary of State from providing financial assistance to Great British Energy if there is credible evidence of modern slavery in its supply chains. Now, I know there has understandably been significant interest in this amendment from members in the other place and from both sides of this House. We recognise that concerns have widely been raised on this issue, and I am seeking to approach this in a collaborative and open way with honourable members. I will also address Lord's Amendment 2A, as our approach to this amendment is similar. I'd first of all like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Rotherham, for her amendment. I've been grateful for her engagement with me ahead of the bill returning to this House, and also pay tribute to her tireless work over many, many years on this important issue. The amendment from my honourable friend would amend the original amendment made in the other place by creating a cross-ministerial task force to which Great British Energy would need to prove its supply chains are free of forced labour. I want this House to be in no doubt that this government is absolutely committed to confronting and tackling modern slavery in energy supply chains. And as set out by my colleague Lord Hunt in the other place, Great British Energy has a range of tools to tackle modern slavery in its supply chains. GBE will prepare a slavery and human trafficking statement when it meets the threshold set out under Section 54 of the Modern Slavery Act 2015, outlining the steps it is taking to ensure slavery and human trafficking are not present in its supply chains nor any part of its business. Under the Procurement Act 2023, GBE can reject bids and terminate contracts with suppliers which are known to use forced labour themselves or anywhere in their supply chain. I'm committing here that GBE will utilise the debarment list to ensure suppliers with unethical supply chains cannot participate in procurements or be awarded contracts by GBE. Of course, I'll give way.
Of course, that isn't altogether correct. He will know full well that the Procurement Act can only act once they've had a conviction under 54 of the Modern Slavery Act. And to do that, they have to be able to proceed against the company that is involved in the slavery. So a British company involved in agency is not involved in the slavery. They would have to get the Chinese government to prosecute the Chinese company that's providing these, to make sure, therefore, that they got a prosecution here. That is never going to happen.
Well, I thank the right honourable gentleman for his contribution and indeed for his many, many years of work on this issue as well. I'll come on to some of the detail in addition to this measure, but I do think it's important to say that the debarment list, which of course was part of the Act passed by the party opposite when in government, is now in force from, I think, February of this year and will be populated in due course, and we'll use that list as the basis of challenging the decisions that Great British Energy can make in terms of not taking contracts from those that are on that list. But I'll look in more detail at the specific points he raises, and I'll come on to some of it later in my speech. In addition to this, GBE will use the Modern Slavery Assessment Tool to assess its supply base for modern slavery risks. And we do expect Great British Energy to take a leading role in ensuring that any companies in which it invests can demonstrate their own assessment of their own supply chains for exposure to forced labour. I can assure the House that with these tools, GBE will tackle modern slavery head-on, and where there is credible evidence that of involvement anywhere in the supply chains, GBE will not only make sure that it does everything within its power to combat the scourge of modern slavery, but also pull up the standards expected for the wider UK energy sector in the process. I will give you.
I thank the Minister for giving way. My constituent, Dorrit Olivia Wolfe, is a Holocaust survivor. She knows what slave labour looks like and has written to the Prime Minister to urge that our energy transition does not repeat so many of the atrocities that she has seen herself. She's awaiting a reply from the Prime Minister. Will the Minister nudge Number 10 along to make sure that she gets the response that she needs and deserves on her behalf and on the behalf of victims of modern slavery across the world?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for raising the point, and I saw the letter obviously widely reported in the press, and it was a very powerful letter. I'm not sure nudging Number 10 is quite within my gift, but I will certainly raise the issue for a response. But the wider point I think raised by it is absolutely right. And look, I absolutely recognise the need for us to, not just in the energy sector actually, but across our economy, make sure that we remove any risk of forced labour in the supply chains. Of course, that should be a commitment that I know we all share across the House. There are a number of different measures we need to take to make that happen, and I'm determined that Great British Energy is a leader in the sector of doing that, particularly within the energy space, clearly. But it was a very powerful letter from your constituent. Coming back to the focus that Great British Energy will have on this at the highest levels of its work, I can commit today that Great British Energy will appoint a senior individual within the organisation to lead on the question of ethical supply chains and modern slavery, and further that the statement of strategic priorities outlined within the bill, which the Secretary of State will issue to GBE once this bill receives royal assent, will include an overarching expectation that GBE proactively works to deliver on these commitments, and in doing so becomes a sector leader in this space, as we would expect from any company owned by the British public. To further demonstrate our commitment across government to this, I can also announce that the government is going to write to all FTSE 100 companies outlining our expectations on responsible businesses to ensure that these issues, especially forced labour and supply chains, are being effectively identified and addressed. And given the importance of tackling modern slavery, it's crucial that businesses play their part to tackle this abhorrent crime, and we can't do this without their support. And so this is an important step across government. I will give way, and then I need to make some progress.
Thank the Minister. He's explaining what the government is doing, but it's not doing what members of this House and members of another place really wanted to do, which is actually not just ask people to do stuff, but really show a lead. And that's what this amendment does. It would allow the UK to really showing its leadership, and on behalf of the British public. This is going to be a huge public company. Why won't the Minister just commit to that further step today?
Well, let me come specifically on to that point, because the specific reason that we disagree with their lordships on this particular amendment is because it doesn't actually do what the honourable gentleman says. It forces the government to cease all of GBE's activities rather than give GBE the scope to address any of the issues that we're raising today on this topic directly within the framework that we've outlined. And as I've set up, of course, we as a government are wholly committed to doing this. Great British Energy will be committed to ensuring that the highest standards are maintained. I'm just going to finish this one first. The highest standards are maintained. But what the amendment does is cease the funding immediately, which doesn't give GB Energy the scope to actually invest in the appropriate supply chains and to tackle those issues directly. I'll give way briefly.
Thank you, Minister, for giving way. And would you accept that many people listening to this will see this as evasion of the issue rather than addressing the issue? We can have the Procurement Act, we can have the task force, we can have the letters to all of the major companies, but the fact of the matter remains that most of these companies will seek financial assistance for the kind of projects that they wish to do, and if it is discovered that there's credible evidence that supply chains have been contaminated by slavery, then the easy way of stopping these purchases from suppliers who act in this way is to say, you're not getting any support.
I don't think I would disagree with that at all, and that's exactly what is possible to happen. There's nothing that forces Great British Energy or any other company to take investment from any individual or company. If they chose not to do so for a whole variety of reasons, then they could absolutely choose not to invest. And if one of those reasons is credible evidence of modern slavery in the supply chain, then I would fully expect them not to invest in those companies. And that is exactly what we're talking about today. But the point is, this has to be a broader conversation than just about Great British Energy. This is about wider supply chains and companies right across the economy, and that's what we're hoping to tackle. And in parallel, I think on that particular issue, I want to work right across government to outline a comprehensive plan to tackle modern slavery across the whole of the economy. The energy sector, of course, is particularly important to me, but there is a question right across the economy. Rather than dealing with this on a company-by-company basis, actually, how do we deal with this problem in a wider sense? And to drive forward that work, I can confirm that I'm going to convene cross-departmental, cross-government ministerial meetings involving the Department for Business and Trade, the Home Office, the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office and my department in the coming weeks to discuss how government can accelerate the work right across government on this really important issue. Very briefly.
I'm really grateful for the speech that he's making and the consideration he has, but will he look at the burden of proof being a reverse burden of proof? So instead of proving that you have excluded, that you've got to then switch the burden of proof to show that you have got no association with modern slavery?
It's a very good point from Honourable Friend, and I'll come on to that very briefly in a moment. All of this work builds on the implementation of the new procurement regime, which focuses on ensuring fair and open competition and treating suppliers equally, as well as the work we're doing on the relaunched Solar Task Force, started under the previous government, but continued under this government to develop resilient, sustainable and innovative solar supply chains that are free from forced labour. We also recognise that the landscape has shifted since the Modern Slavery Act came into effect, and that's why yesterday the Home Office published updated statutory guidance on transparency in supply chains, which provides comprehensive and practical advice for businesses on how to tackle forced labour in their supply chains. Great British Energy will, of course, follow any new measures on modern slavery to which it's subject, just as any responsible public or private body should. I hope that the new steps I've outlined today will reassure the House that departments across government will continue to work intensively on this issue. Before I move on, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to very briefly reflect on the amendment from my honourable friend, the member for Leeds Central and Headingley, which would require the Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner to define credible evidence in Lord's Amendment 2. And while I thank my honourable friend for this amendment, we have to resist it, as the Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner's role was established to encourage good practice rather than to look specifically into supply chains of individual companies. This amendment would place a significant lawmaking function on the Commissioner, which the role was not designed for and is currently not within the Commissioner's powers. This amendment would also have wider implications for how evidence of modern slavery is assessed and could create unnecessary legal uncertainty and precedent. Turning to the remaining amendments, the Government were pleased to table Lord's Amendments 1 and 3 through 12, following positive discussions with peers in the other place. Starting with Lord's Amendment 1, which puts community energy on the face of the bill, this government had a manifesto commitment to deliver a step change in community energy across the UK, and we set up GBE to deliver our local power plan. It's at the heart of our plans for GBE. However, we recognise that during the bill's passage it was highlighted that the role of community energy should be made explicit in the bill, and my colleagues, as my colleagues have said in the other place, the government has accepted this, and it's right that it is now within the objects of the bill. I'll very briefly give way.
Thank you for giving way on that. I just want to raise the issue with regard to community energy, and very much welcome the amendment that's come forward. Would he agree that it is important, not just in terms of jobs and investment, but also the issue of actually engaging communities with the transition to a new energy system? Would he also recognise the need for government to support those initiatives in terms of funding going forward?
Yeah, well, I agree with my honourable friend on both points. Community energy is incredibly important to give communities a stake in the energy future, to deliver the social and economic benefits that go with it. And just last week we announced a significant amount of funding through GBE for community energy projects across England, and funding for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland to spend on similar projects, including community energy projects in their own area. I'm going to have to make a bit of progress, but I will give way very briefly.
Minister, can he advise the House today on the level of recurrence to that funding? Will it be year-on-year funding? And can he give us an indication, maybe not precisely, but broadly, what that funding stream will be year-on-year under GB Energy?
It will not be recurring in the same methodology. At the moment, GBE doesn't exist, and so we carried out this initial set of investments in a particular way. Going forward, those projects will be on the basis of the individual investment propositions put forward. So individual projects in Scotland or in other parts of the UK will apply for funding. They will be considered alongside other investments, and those investments will be made. But we won't be delivering funding on a population share on that basis going forward. But of course, there is funding already going to the Scottish Government, a significant increase in the budget this year to fund things like CARES and the community energy work that's going on in Scotland already. Lord's Amendment 3, very briefly, came in recognition of concerns raised about the length of time GB could operate without strategic priorities. We have agreed to an amendment which would prepare a set of strategic priorities within 6 months, although I can tell the House, as I did at committee stage, we intend to move far faster than that. Lord's Amendments 4 to 10 were brought about following positive engagement with the devolved governments, and we are committed to collaboration on a UK-wide basis. The particular amendment here under Clause 5 moved from consulting with devolved governments to consent in relation to devolved competencies, and I'm very grateful to my ministerial colleagues in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland for engaging so productively, and also for the Parliament's legislative consent motions on the bill. Lord's Amendment 11 introduces an independent review of Great British Energy's effectiveness. And finally, Lord's Amendment 12 ensures that Great British Energy will keep the impact of its activities on sustainable development under review. I know this was a concern that a number of members raised around how we conserve nature and biodiversity while advancing clean power, so I hope the House will join me in welcoming this addition. I look forward to this, albeit short, debate this afternoon, and I urge the House to support the Government's position on these amendments. Thank you.
The question is that this House agrees with the Lords in their Amendment 1. I call Shadow Minister Mr Andrew Bowie.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Speaker, this is a sad and quite incredible day that we are seeing in this House. On many occasions in the past few months, we have debated this Government's energy policies. Frequently, we have debated the merits or lack thereof in Great British Energy, an organisation about which we still know very little. What is it for? What it will do? We were told by the party opposite it would bring down bills by £300, but bills have gone up. We were told by the party opposite it would create jobs, but nobody can tell us how many or by when. We were told by the party opposite it would be based in Aberdeen, but the interim chairman is based in Manchester, and it looks unlikely we'll see little more than a brass plaque in the Granite City. We were told it would employ thousands of people, then that turned to hundreds. We were told it would generate energy, but it won't. It doesn't have a licence to generate any energy. We were told it would guarantee a positive return on every investment, but that is impossible. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will of course be asking again the Right Honourable Gentleman what this entity will actually do. Do they know? Will it be seeking an electricity generation licence? And how will it bring down energy costs in this country? Turning to today, far from the Secretary of State and the Minister's insistence that Great British Energy will free us from reliance on foreign dictatorships, this headlong rush to Clean Power 2030 will in fact make us more reliant than ever on the People's Republic of China. He and his ministers are quick to note the reluctance to rely on petrostate dictators. I wonder how he would characterise the People's Republic of China, where political opposition is illegal, where citizens have more limited political rights than in the Russian Federation, and where dissent is invariably punished, and where the use of forced labour is proven. Madam Deputy Speaker, in 2022 we blocked Chinese General Nuclear from involvement in Sizewell C. In 2020 we prevented Chinese influence in our communications networks under the guise of Huawei. And yet, despite serious concerns about the national security implications, about the ethical implications, about the high climate emissions, the Secretary of State and ministers are opening the gates to Chinese technology in our North Sea wind farms to solar panels made with slave labour and using coal power. And it is in the context of our increasing reliance on foreign states that I wish to speak to the Lord's amendments, particularly to Amendment 2, as brought in the other place by the noble Lord Alton of Liverpool, and I am grateful to him, and we all recognise his long-standing dedication to this serious matter. And I said, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a sad day, and I feel for those Labour MPs, many of whom I have a great deal of respect for, those members who came into this House, into politics, and specifically into their party because they believe in social justice, in decency, and for whom this is not just a job but a vocation, who came here in July believing they would be part of a project to create a better world in the spirit of Bevan, of Attlee, of Hardy, of Wilson. I do wonder what those titans of that proud Labour movement would make of this today. Because it was on this day in 1807 that the Abolition of the Slave Trade Act received royal assent, on this day. And 218 years on, Labour MPs are going to be whipped to allow the state to directly fund imports of goods built by slave labour in China. What will the MPs... It's absolutely, they complain, but it's true. What will the MPs say to their constituents, their voters? How will they explain this vote? In the week that we mark 10 years since the Modern Slavery Act. Indeed, how will they explain it to themselves? We are proud to have introduced that Act 10 years ago. It was a landmark piece of legislation. However, it is right that we recognise now that the protections against the use of public money in supply chains with exposure to the use of modern slave labour need to be more robust. Voting against this incredibly sensible amendment that seeks to protect some of the most oppressed people in the world, that seeks to ensure that our net zero objectives, whatever your view on them, won't be built on the back of slave labour, on the backs of the Uyghur Muslims of Xinjiang and elsewhere. The vast majority of solar panels are exposed to yin-yang silicon, where manufacturers have been found to have links to Uyghur forced labour. Therefore, Madam Deputy Speaker, what we are seeing today isn't simply the offshoring of our emissions, although we are. It isn't just the offshoring of our energy security, although that is also true. Today, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are seeing the offshoring of the Labour Party's moral compass, and we all know why. Clean power by 2030 demands it. The fact is they will not achieve that target that they signed up to without the help of China, without importing his green revolution from coal-powered factories thousands of miles away. They are pursuing a made-in-China energy transition, a transition built on the backs of slave labour and powered by Chinese coal. It is quite ironic, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the Minister is simply willing to stomach the higher carbon emissions associated with importing LNG from abroad, 4 times higher emissions, rather than drilling at home. They want to import solar panels manufactured during coal power and tainted by human rights abuses, rather than giving our domestic supply chains the time to grow. It is an irony, Madam Deputy Speaker, which is not lost on us, neither will it be lost on the country. This is, I am afraid, the Pyrrhic victory of ideology over sense, of zealotry over the national interest. It's bad for Britain, it's bad for bill payers, and it really is actually quite bad for the climate. It's great. I would be delighted to give way to my old friend.
I thank the Shadow Minister for giving way. And on our energy security, does he agree with me that if we build more of that infrastructure here in the United Kingdom, that is good for British jobs and that is good for our energy security? Also, so is issuing new oil and gas licences in Scotland so we can produce more of our energy here at home that will make us safer from volatile energy markets abroad.
My honourable friend will not be at all surprised to learn that I can agree with him entirely. It is purely the imposition on this country of arbitrary and needless targets like Clean Power 2030 to generate headlines and have the Secretary of State's name up in lights, that is requiring us to become more reliant on the People's Republic of China for the goods, for the technology, for the equipment to develop the solar farms, nearly all of which will be tainted by slave labour in some way, given the reliance on that country, of that part of that country, for that infrastructure and that technology. So, of course, I agree with them, and of course it would be much better if we were issuing new licences and continuing to support our own domestic oil and gas industry. That is something that we've debated time and time again, and I'm sure we'll come back to this House to debate again in the future. Great British Energy is not great, it's not British, and it won't generate any energy. Public funds should not, must not, be funding imports tainted by modern slavery, slave labour. British taxpayers deserve better, a domestic supply chain which creates jobs at home rather than funding abuses abroad. And that reason is why we are supporting Lord's Amendment 2. And I urge honourable members opposite to do the right thing today and vote for that as well.
I call Sarah Champion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak to my amendment to the Lord's Amendment 2, which I hope might act as a bridge between our two houses. Because whilst I welcome this bill, from the moment it started its journey through Parliament, I've been issuing a warning. Without proper safeguards in place, our transition to net zero will be carried through on the backs of those in slavery. Renewable energy is vital for our transformation to a low-carbon economy, but we know human rights abuses are inherent in our green technology. There's evidence of child labour in DRC cobalt mining and of labour exploitation in nickel processing in Indonesia. Forced labour is committed at scale in Xinjiang, China, with the abuse of Uyghurs in the production of steel, a material that makes up nearly 80% of our wind turbines, and of course the well-documented abuse in the production of solar panels. At report stage, I was hugely grateful for the Energy Secretary's commitment to me, and I quote, "We have been clear that no company in the UK should have forced labour in its supply chain, and we will be working with colleagues across government to tackle the issue of Uyghur forced labour in supply chains." But too often, we have accepted warm words at the dispatch box that then fail to materialise. This bill is a serious piece of legislation, not least as the government has committed to capitalising GB Energy with over £8.3 billion. If companies want to benefit from taxpayers' money, they must be able to prove that their supply chains are free of forced labour. I've tabled Amendment 2A to this effect, which places the burden of proof onto the businesses. Cross-government working is the only way to put an end to the state of stagnation in our responses to modern slavery. Once slavery is found, we must take action, including placing rogue companies on the Procurement Act's disbarment list, banning them from winning other public contracts. The public deserves a guarantee that their money won't be used to fund human rights abuses. To quote the Minister for the Minister of Business and Trade, no company should have abuses in their supply chains. So I admire the Minister's resolve to give genuine commitments to root out slavery in their areas of responsibility. And when it comes to GBE, my amendment gives a simple, cost-effective method to achieve that. I'm glad the Minister agrees, but let me repeat back what I believe he has committed to and push him a little further for clarity. Firstly, and probably primarily, can he confirm that there will be clarity within GB Energy's strategic objectives and framework document that designated companies must not use forced labour in any part of their supply chains, and this needs to be mapped down to raw materials? I'm glad that there will be a cross-ministerial working group to work across departments to tackle slavery in supply chains. That's exactly what needs to happen. And a commitment to leverage the Procurement Act's debarment list where there is evidence of bidders or suppliers with unethical supply chains. And let us remember that the Act includes discretionary grounds that don't require a conviction. And of course, all of this requires a designated leader within GBE to take accountability for this. Finally, one more ask, if possible. Will he prioritise buying British to boost our economy and avoid the risk of a reliance on slave-made renewables from international sources. Of course, the issue of modern slavery is bigger than renewables, but we must start somewhere. And with a clear path and strong commitments, GB Energy can lead from the front and stop the UK becoming a dumping ground for slave-made goods. So, based on his word and seeking those clarifications, I withdraw my amendment, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I hope it also satisfies the other place that the Minister has listened and acted to stamp out modern slavery in GB Energy's future procurement. And I thank the Minister for this.
I call Liberal Democrat spokesperson Pippa Heylings.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to welcome here today, alongside community groups like Power for People, Community Energy England and community groups across the country, to welcome the inclusion of community energy and community benefits on the front face of the Great British Energy Bill through Lord's Amendment 1. It was possible after all, and I congratulate the Government for taking this step. We Liberal Democrats have pushed hard for that in this House and in the other House, but there's been a lot of cross-party working on this as well to achieve it, and I'm delighted that this is now enshrined in law. Because this is a victory for community voices, giving them a real stake in the energy transition through full or partial ownership of local power. And communities like mine in South Cambridgeshire, where many are off-grid and struggling with the volatile prices and spice hikes for oil, they want to generate and sell their own green energy locally. It's absurd that this isn't possible. I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. There's 5 community energy schemes in my constituency of Glastonbury and Somerton, and they all contribute to local energy supplies. So an increase in community energy projects would boost the local economy, as she was saying, create jobs and reduce energy costs, especially in rural areas. So does she agree that we must go further and to create these long-term plans to support this type of initiative?
I completely agree with my honourable friend, and of course this is the statutory steer within the Great British Energy Bill to help us have those long-term plans. And I would also, because the clean energy transition has to be done with communities, not to communities. And I also commend the Government for committing the additional £5 million to the Community Energy Fund, bringing certainty at least to its short-term future. The Lord's Amendment 1 also addresses community benefits, which are critical for taking people with us on this pathway to the energy transition. If communities are to host energy infrastructure, onshore wind or large-scale solar farm, these benefits have got to go beyond token gestures such as roofs for scout huts or some apprenticeships. If we take the example from Scotland, for example, around £5,000 per megawatt per year, take a controversial large-scale solar project in my constituency, the Kingsway Solar Farm. That could provide £2.5 million annually to the local community. And this is the kind of scale that we have to be talking about. And it has to be the community that determines how and where that money is spent. Lord's Amendment 12, Madam Deputy Speaker, is also a vital addition, requiring GB Energy to keep its impact on sustainable development under review, and credit is due to Baroness Heyman, who really fought tirelessly in the other House to ensure that sustainability is embedded in our energy transition through that amendment. We welcome the assurances we've received that in the framework agreement that will be updated, not only will the local economies of coastal communities be taken into consideration, but there will also be a climate and nature duty explicit for GB Energy, because GB Energy has to consider the economic, environmental and social needs, ensuring future generations can also meet theirs. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, we also have to discuss the Lord's Amendment 2, and we would have liked to discuss Amendments 2A in the name of the MP for Rotherham and 2B in the name of the MP for Leeds Central and Headingley, because modern slavery is a barbaric practice that should have been eradicated long ago. Whilst we look to the promise of our green energy transformation, that cannot take place at the cost of human rights abuses across the world. Research from Sheffield Hallam University has directly linked China's labour transfer programme to the global solar supply chain. China produces 40% of the world's polysilicon and 80% of its solar panels. And right now, 2.7 million Uyghurs are subjected to state detention and forced labour. So it's incomprehensible that government seeks to vote down this amendment that would withdraw GB Energy investment from supply chains tainted by forced labour. GB Energy has to set the standard, not muddle along. And currently, there is nothing sufficiently robust to ensure that that would happen. The Solar Power Task Force does not have the mandate to do this. We have heard that the Procurement Act cannot address this. And we have heard that it shouldn't just be the energy sector. The health sector has already included this in the Health and Social Care Act. It has shown leadership. This is a key piece of legislation, and it therefore should be part of this legislation too. The Liberal Democrats... I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Not just the practicalities of the need to include these measures. Is it not essential that we show the public that the cause for which I think there is overwhelming public support, notwithstanding some parties' attitudes towards our need to get to net zero and when, that the measures that we are promoting to achieve that are not tainted by human rights abuses?
Completely agree with my honourable friend, and that's why the Liberal Democrats will continue to call for trade restrictions with regions where abuses take place, including Xinjiang, and advocate for Magnitsky-style sanctions against individuals and entities involved in Uyghur persecution. Because this is more than about Britain. It's about playing our part conscientiously in a global movement where all human rights abuses are stopped. Thank you, Madam Deputy.
I call Alex Sobel.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise speaking in support of my Amendment 2B, my capacity as a member of the Joint Committee on Human Rights, which is currently undertaking an inquiry on forced labour in UK supply chains. This amendment gives a mechanism to the amendment tabled and passed in the Lords from our Chair, Lord Alton of Liverpool. The Lords Amendment seeks to prevent the Secretary of State providing financial assistance to any company designated Great British Energy where there is credible evidence of modern slavery in their supply chain. My amendment today takes into account some of the arguments made by the government in the Lords, seeking to refine the Lords Amendment, providing a mechanism for determining credible evidence. My amendment therefore empowers independent anti-slavery commissioner to define what constitutes credible evidence of supply chain slavery. This is crafted to allow the bill to be as business-friendly as possible while ensuring it still has teeth. And the Commissioner is backing this initiative. I'd like to begin by welcoming GB Energy Bill and GB Energy. I support the creation of GB Energy, the government's commitment to achieving our net zero ambitions and clean power by 2030. But we must have the highest ethical standards for our solar industry. The British public doesn't want our net zero future built on slave labour. Eunice, in its report on sourcing solar energy without Uyghur forced labour, states all polysilicon manufacturers in the Uyghur region are participating in forced labour transfer programmes and or supplied by raw material manufacturers that have. Multiple UK public sector bodies have been found to procure solar materials from companies sourcing polysilicon from the region. As the UK's solar capacity sets to double in the future, the concerns amount that Council and other public service bodies will get locked into long-term contracts with unethical suppliers. We need to ensure that our solar supply chain is free of Uyghur slave labour. A report by the China Strategic Risk Institute estimates that if Beijing were to restrict solar exports, it would cost the UK economy £4.4 billion, raising house energy bills by £155 and stall our path to net zero, leave our ability to meet climate goals and protect British consumers at the mercy of decisions made in China. We just need to look at the current raising tariffs around the world, including on China, to understand the risks that are there if we rely solely on China for polysilicons and solar panels. If GB Energy became reliant solely on those solar panels in China, we are not just complicit in human rights abuses, we're creating an enormous point of strategic vulnerability in our energy system. Give the Chinese state a lever of influence over our critical infrastructure, it would undermine our sovereignty. In the words of Professor Laura Murphy, who's been the Senior Policy Advisor of the United States Department of Homeland Security on the Uyghur forced labour prevention action until January this year, perhaps the world's leading expert on Xinjiang supply chains. She said, from a human rights and climate perspective, the alternative of basing our green energy on Xinjiang coal's high carbon emissions and on the forced labour of oppressed communities is a higher and longer term price to pay. And what are British workers? If we allow GB Energy to contract companies that profit from modern slavery, we are directly undermining fair competition. No British worker can compete with a system that relies on forced labour. In our manifesto, we pledge secure, well-paid green jobs This amendment seeks to ensure that British workers are not undercut by Chinese renewable companies that profit from modern slavery, and that GB Energy promotes not only the development of the UK's renewable sector, but improved human rights for all workers at each stage of the supply chain. It is also true that the United States legislation has nudged companies to diversify their supply chains, and there is a gradual move away from suppliers using forced labour in the United States. Under the provisions of the Uyghur Forced Labour Prevention Act, a number of companies have been sanctioned for using forced labour. The Solar Task Force, while a welcome step, is not empowered to assess modern slavery risks in procurement, nor is it equipped with the anti-slavery expertise necessary to mitigate those risks. I know the Task Force work has come to conclusion, so I'd just like to ask the Minister to outline the steps that will follow the work of the Task Force to ensure a solid mechanism that excludes forced labour products in the solar supply chain. As my honourable friend, the Minister, has stated in the past, no UK company should have forced labour in its supply chains, and the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero has reaffirmed that position. The Secretary of State for Business and Trade gave an absolute assurance that no modern slavery would be permitted in supply chains affecting UK goods. This amendment simply ensures those commitments are enforced in practice. Sadly, the current statutory has not been sufficient to prevent slave-made renewables entering the UK, so more must be done, and this amendment is a modest and business-friendly way to incentivise cleaner supply chains. This bill presents an opportunity to use the purchasing power of the government to nudge business in the right direction. This week marks 10 years since the Modern Slavery Act became law. Once a leader in the fight against modern slavery are now in danger of falling behind after legislation in the US, as I've outlined, and now in the EU. This amendment presents a credible mechanism to assure a clean energy future. This is just one way, as the Minister outlined, of ensuring that we can remove forced labour from our supply chains. The Minister raised the prospect of using the Procurement Act 2023, and I welcome what he said. The Act at the moment requires suppliers to be convicted under the Modern Slavery Act or an offence in their own country. The nature of forced labour in supply chains in China means that it is disguised, and currently those conditions would not be met. I'd like to ask if the Minister, in the very welcome cross-departmental working group that he's announced in his opening statements, will be looking at the Procurement Act and ensuring the Procurement Act is fit for purpose, and looking at the way the United States has utilised a rebuttal presumption for goods from Xinjiang or another similar mechanism. Will the Minister, as a matter of urgency, with his cross-departmental working group, ensure that we have the powers and expertise to prevent forced labour in our solar supply chains, and will he work with the trade unions, NGOs and the Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner on this? Will the Minister meet with me and Professor Laura Murphy, as she's now working at Sheffield Hallam University, on this issue as a matter of urgency to explore the detail of how to ensure a robust system, as she helped implement in the United States, and work with me on ensuring a robust system not just for GB Energy but our whole solar industry? I absolutely agree with the Minister, this is not just an issue for GB Energy but our whole solar industry. Will the Minister work with me to get a workable debarment list to ensure that GB Energy is acting on modern slavery, and a commitment that GB Energy's operating framework is committed to tackling forced labour? If I get these reassurances from the Minister, I am happy to withdraw my amendment and work with the Government and the Government's Departmental Cross-Working Group and others to ensure that we can take the scandal of forced labour out of our solar supply chains. Thank you.
Yeah.
I call Sir Iain Duncan Smith.
Deputy Speaker, grateful to be called at this particular point. Others will want to speak, so I'm going to be as brief as I possibly can. The Minister is incorrect, as I said earlier on, in believing that the Procurement Act gives them any protection at all against modern slavery in the supply chain. It's a fact of life. We've known about it for ages. I was one of those who brought the Modern Day Slavery Act into government 10 years ago. But at that time, we didn't understand how bad it was in China. We know now for a fact that over 90% of the polysilicon that is made for the world is made in China. We know a huge amount of that, about 97% of all the solar arrays that are being sold here will have polysilicon made from Xinjiang, which will be made by slave labour. We know that, so there's no dispute at all about that. The question really facing the government is not, I wonder if the Minister would listen, I'd be grateful. The problem facing the government is not, does it think that modern slavery is good or bad? I don't for one moment accuse them of that. What I say right now is what has gone missing in all of this, and what the Noble Lord's amendment did was to focus back on the fact that we have no requirement on government or a way in which they can deal with slavery in the supply chain. You know, America, has been said earlier on, has turned the burden of proof upside down and said, we assume you have slave labour in your product. You now prove to us that you do not. That is the only way to deal with it. And they then sanction those companies. So we have none of that available to the government under this. And the Procurement Act does not even begin a whisper of that, because it needs the Modern-Day Slavery Act to have mounted a prosecution, which it cannot, because a company that is an agent for a Chinese-made array will not be prosecuted, only the China company that makes it under the present laws, and that means that no prosecution will take place, because no company in China is going to be prosecuted by the Chinese government, because they're the ones that set up this ghastly process in the first place. And why? Because it makes their arrays cheaper than anybody else's in the world. That's why they pretty much wiped out all other array production in the world. So now, ask yourselves, where are they going to get those arrays from? The answer is not. And if you had to, you'd pay a lot of money. So I understand what's going on here is a debate probably in government, well, if we go down this road, it's going to be awfully expensive and the costs will go up. I simply say to the government in conclusion on this, they know what the facts are. This amendment over here, 2B, I am supportive of it, and I support the honourable member who, on the right reasons, have brought it forward. I support the way in which the honourable lady brought hers forward. But the main thing is, you must act. If we do not act, we do not make it illegal, if we do not punish those companies that are involved in it, directly as agents or not, then we will be guilty. Guilty of increasing slavery in China, and that is what this debate tonight is all about. So I'm sorry the government is going to get rid of this amendment. I think they could have done a deal to have enhanced it or whatever, but now they will have to commit to coming forward with legislation to increase and improve the Act that there you have, and that is going to take another debate. I say to the government, for goodness sake, I've had this, by the way, with my own government when they were in. I voted against them. I voted with the Labour Party to put this in the Health and Social Care Bill. We did that together. So I hope nobody thinks that I'm being party political. I am not. I'm sanctioned by the Chinese government because we raised this originally. So I say to them, I will not stop, and many in this House will not stop until the government faces up to one thing and one thing only. Not one life through modern slavery is worth a lower cost of a solar array, and that should be an epitaph of this ridiculous position the government is in now.
I call James Naish.
Speaker, and as a former energy industry professional before entering this place, I am very pleased to see that Great British Energy is making impressive strides. Securing a landmark partnership with the Crown Estate, we've seen Great British Energy commit to more and more solar power, which is much welcomed by my constituents. And of course, we've seen investment in carbon capture and storage clusters in Teesside and Merseyside, bringing thousands of jobs to those areas. More broadly, I also welcome the government's move to lift the ban on onshore wind in England, to promote funding in newer emerging industries, including hydrogen and fusion energy. And I look forward to the government announcing the winner of the small modular reactor contract at some point over the coming weeks, when I hope the government will also be placing a sizable order. But as we advance towards a future of clean, secure, homegrown energy, we must also ensure that this future is built on principles of justice and respect for human rights. And I therefore also want to talk to Lord's Amendment 2 today. Madam Deputy Speaker, since being elected last year as a Member of Parliament for Rushcliffe, I have been contacted by constituents voicing their concerns about what is happening in Xinjiang, Uyghur Autonomous Region of China. In 2021, Sir Geoffrey Nice KC delivered the Uyghur Tribunal's judgment here in London, deeming that the Chinese government's policies amount to, and I quote, a deliberate, systematic and concerted policy to bring about long-term reduction of the Uyghur and other ethnic minority populations. Madam Deputy Speaker, forced labour is, I'm afraid, being used as a key instrument in this campaign of oppression. Over 1 million Uyghurs have been detained in re-education camps, and many are transferred to work in factories, mines and fields under barbaric conditions. As has been mentioned, some of those factories produce polysilicon, a critical component in 95% of the world's solar panels. And on this basis, it is estimated that around 40% of the UK solar industry may be at risk of sourcing materials tainted by this state-sponsored forced labour. That is why I believe that this House has a responsibility to ask hard questions, as these amendments today have done. And if we are to stand as a country that champions both human rights and climate action, we must ensure that our clean energy future is not built on the backs of exploited peoples. The choices we make on legislation like this, on who receives British taxpayers' money, on what standards we demand in procurement, are not abstract. They are ultimately a measure of whether we are willing to trade convenience for complicity. It is right, therefore, that we always examine how supply chains operate. It is right that we consider how credible evidence of forced labour should be defined and who is best placed to determine that. And it is right that we reflect on whether our current legal frameworks are sufficient. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Modern Slavery Act 2015, as has been mentioned, was groundbreaking at the time, but currently lacks the teeth to tackle forced labour that is taking place in Xinjiang. And in this context, I believe we should note the steps that have been taken across the Atlantic. In June, it will be 3 years since the Uyghur Forced Labour Prevention Act was enacted in the United States. And I believe that similar resolve is needed here in the United Kingdom, and that we should expedite updating and strengthening our modern slavery legislation in light of Great British Energy's ambitious plans. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Uyghur people and others facing slavery around the world deserve to know that Britain will not turn a blind eye. We cannot end all injustice, but we can ensure that our laws, our procurement policies and our public financing do not sustain atrocities. I therefore implore the Government to listen to these benches today and those opposite. I thank the Minister for the significant steps that he has outlined already today, and I ask him to reassure us once more that the relevant steps will be taken to prevent Great British Energy from in any way contributing towards promoting or sustaining known atrocities.
Here. I call Harriet Cross.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I appreciate the number of people still wanting to speak, so I'll keep my comments short. This amendment, Lord Amendments 2, and the Government refusing to support it shows the absolutism of their net zero policy and their energy policy. The amendment is not just sensible, but it is morally correct. And voting against it, this Government is signalling that its ambition to reach net zero trumps everything else. And can that really be correct? Because that is what this amendment is setting up. If we cannot support those suffering from slave labour, modern slavery, what are we doing? And is net zero, the rush to net zero, really worth that? Net zero, what is it for? It is there to prevent us, the people on the planet, from going down a way where the planet is not inhabitable, not livable. That is what we're sold. So therefore, what are we saving the planet for if it's not for people to be able to work in a safe, secure way? We cannot sacrifice that. We cannot condone that by selling our morals to China in order to rush towards net zero. Because the Uyghur Muslims in China do not have a safe, secure place to work. They are oppressed. And by not supporting this Lord's Amendment, the Government are supporting that oppression. We have rightly condoned slavery in the past. The Government has rightly condoned past slavery, but they are now happy to condone forced labour in China. It is an unbelievable situation that we have found ourselves in, but we are getting used to this sort of behaviour from the Government. Their heartless policies that we have seen since they came to power, whether that's the family farm tax, whether that's the tax on jobs that is putting people out of work, whether that's taxing children's hospices, which we've seen go through this afternoon, and then we have this amendment which they are not supporting. And by not supporting this amendment, they are effectively saying that they are happy to turn a blind eye to modern slavery across the world, and that's something that we on this side of the House cannot possibly support. Until July last year, the Labour government, the Labour Party, seemed happy to promote their morals, but it seemed that those morals were left on the last door they knocked on in July.
With leave of the House, I now call the Minister Michael Shanks.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With the leave of the House, I'll sum up the debate. And can I start firstly by just saying thank you to all honourable and right honourable members for their contributions in this, albeit short, debate on a number of the different amendments that we are discussing today, but particularly, of course, on the most perhaps important issue of all around the question of forced labour and modern slavery in our economy. I do want to just reflect on some of the contributions from both sides of the House, but let me just start by saying, first of all, I hear the very strong views from members on this issue, and it is right, of course, that government of whatever party constantly challenges itself to go further in tackling these issues, because, as I think the right honourable gentleman put it, for even one person to be affected by forced labour is an absolute disgrace, and we should collectively find whatever means we can to tackle this issue. So I do want to reiterate very clearly, contrary to some of the contributions that we've heard from the party opposite, that this particular amendment is around amending the Great British Energy Bill. It is not about the government's wider commitment on tackling modern slavery, and it can be repeated as often as honourable members opposite might like. It's simply disingenuous to come to this place and suggest that this party has suddenly decided not to care about this issue, and I really do take issue with that. Well, the right honourable gentleman wasn't in for a lot of the debate, but I will give way to
for giving way. And I think the Minister will accept this is a very modest amendment that could make a significant difference to people's lives and outcomes in China. And there's the talk of buying off their back benches by saying there's further legislation coming down the line. When's that legislation going to come down the line? 6 months' time? A year's time? 2 years' time? When is it going to come?
Well, first of all, the right honourable gentleman cares so much about the issue, he's only just turned up to the debate. But second of all, he was also a very senior member of the government for 14 years. If this was an issue that he cared about so much, why is it that we're here debating this issue now? The truth is the previous government could have tackled this much more clearly. So I think I won't follow on that particular point. But let me just be really clear. As I said in the opening debate, which I think the right honourable gentleman wasn't here for, that we have said very, very clearly that there should be no modern slavery anywhere in our economy or anywhere in our supply chains. And we have to work right across government and right across the economy to deliver this, because it is not only going to be the investments that Great British Energy makes that will... I'm not going to give... I'll give way very briefly, and then I need to finish.
The Modern Slavery Act doesn't work on this, and the Procurement Act doesn't work. You can't do it. It's got to meet 2 criteria to do anything. And they're only advised about doing things. During the organ harvesting was accosted as ethical organ transplant system in the World Health Organization. And we had to prove that against that. All these things, it's state-invented, state-imposed disguised chains. You can't get to the supply chains. I urge you to accept, and please, please, give a commitment that you will listen to these 2 amendments we've listened to.
Minister.
I do understand the argument that the honourable lady is making, but the crucial detail that I'm referring to here is that the problems that she speaks of demonstrate why this is a problem far broader than just Great British Energy. This is a bill about setting up Great British Energy as a publicly owned energy company. The wider issues in the economy that she quite rightly highlights, that other members have highlighted, I need to close, I'm sorry, that other members have highlighted, is about the wider economy and investment right across our supply chains. Of course, part of the reason we're setting up Great British Energy, in spite of the party opposite, is because we want to deliver homegrown supply chains in this country, an industrial strategy that the party opposite completely failed to deliver for 14 years. In fact, a complete ignorance of how we build the supply chains here. And if we delivered on some of the supply chains in this country, we might not have to import quite so much. But of course, honourable members can shout opposite all they want. They know that they failed on this matter, and we are picking up the pieces from it. I do want to, for those members that were in the debate, I want to respond to the points that were raised, and in particular to my honourable friend, the member for Rotherham, who made a very powerful speech. I think particularly picking up the point around just how widespread the problem of forced labour is, and it underlines why a piecemeal approach, looking at legislating in individual companies here and there, is not the right approach, but why we need work right across government to tackle this throughout the full economy. And she asked for clarity on some of the points made. She's right to reiterate the point that I intend to pull together ministers from right across government, from the Foreign Office, the Home Office, the Department for Business and Trade and my own department, to look at how we can collectively tackle this issue. There will be a designated leader within Great British Energy to drive this work forward. We will utilise the debarment list. And on the broader point, we fully expect Great British Energy to do everything in its power under the relevant guidance and legislation to remove any instances of forced labour from their supply chains, and they must not approve the use of products from companies that may be linked to forced labour. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is an important debate on a bill that was in our manifesto that delivers the first new national publicly owned energy generation company in 75 years, backed by the British public, delivering jobs, delivering investment all over the country. It will deliver the deployment of clean power. We will tackle the supply chains to make sure that jobs come to this country and that we tackle the scourge of modern slavery, not just through GBE but right across the economy. That's our commitment, and I urge honourable members to support the government's position today. And in doing so, Madam Deputy Speaker, I do reiterate the point that I made earlier, that I am, in the 15 seconds left, very willing to work with right honourable members right across this House to tackle this fundamental issue, because it is of extreme importance to right across the government that we tackle this. And thank you, Madam.
Order, order. I must now put the questions necessary to bring to a conclusion proceedings on the Lord amendments. The question is that this House agrees with the Lords in their Amendment 1. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to the motion to disagree with the Lords Amendment 2. I call the Minister to move the motion formally. The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 2. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No! No! Division, clear the lobby. Is as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Jen Kitchen, Christian Wakeford. Tellers for the noes, Andrew Snowden, Jerome Mayhew. Order, order.
The ayes to the right, 314. The noes to the left, 198.
The ayes were 314, the noes were 198. So the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Unlock. The question is that this House agrees with the Lords in their amendments 3 to 12. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Minister to move that a committee be appointed to draw up a reason.
I beg to move that a committee be appointed to draw up a reason to be assigned to the Lords for disagreeing to their amendments to that Michael Shanks, Anna Turley, Chris MacDonald, Luke Meyer, Luke Murphy, Andrew Bowie and Susan Murray be members of the committee, that Michael Shanks be the chair of the committee, that 3 be the quorum of the committee, and that the committee do withdraw immediately.
The question is that a committee be appointed to draw out reasons to be assigned to the Lords for disagreeing to their Amendment 2, that Michael Shanks, Anna Turley, Chris MacDonald, Luke Meyer, Luke Murphy, Andrew Bowie, Susan Murray be members of the committee, that Michael Shanks be the chair of the committee, that the 3 be the quorum of the committee, that the committee do withdraw immediately. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. And the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. That concludes consideration of Lord's amendment to the Great British Energy Bill.